If you saw the world trapped in a never-ending cycle doomed to mediocrity, unfulfillment, and the stifling of future growth, would you change it? Or would you let things continue to be the same by the people or beings who perpetuate the cycle? DragonFable poses this question and many more in one of their newer questline releases, the Maleurous Saga. Kinda hope I pronounced that one right. Specifically though, this is done through the narrative device of an antagonistic force of a character presented to the player called Notha. This questline has had its fair share of controversies within the community, with some praising it, with others criticizing the execution, but I'm not here for that today. Although, if you would like to see me talk about that, please let me know in the comments below. I've had this video drafted since September of 2024, but a recent small talk in the DragonFable's Discord motivated me to properly make this video today. So we're simply going to be breaking down why, at least in my opinion, Notha was right, mostly. I think she's written to be a little smarmy, and I understand why people find her as a character immature and kind of insufferable, but ultimately she presents the best course of action presented within the dilemma of the saga. By listening to Uwanta, aka picking the current considered canonical option, she may sound far more reasonable, but you're bound to doom the world of DragonFable, which is called lore, to the same fate it's always dealt with. I'll be addressing common retorts and questions at the end of the video, so keep an eye out for that. If you're watching this video, chances are you've already played through the questline, the saga, or you roughly know what it's about. But for some reason, if you haven't, one, why are you here? But still, I'll summarize DragonFable and the plot in a few seconds. You can skip to this portion of the video if you're already familiar with it. DragonFable is a fantasy story made by Artix Entertainment, which has had several writers over the 18 years, Jesus Christ, I was 6 when this came out, of its runtime, but it's regarded to truly have come into its own when the writers and developers, Tomix and Maleurous, took the reins of the game. DragonFable has categorized its thousands of quests into books, which contain each main quest line. Book 1, which covers the Orb Saga, where you must race to gather 8 elemental orbs before the antagonist does. Book 2, which is on the shorter side and covers the ramifications of certain actions in Book 1, and Book 3, which will be the focus of today's video. Spoilers of course, but Book 3 covers the result of your main character being frozen in time for a couple of years, as a new movement arises that wants to end the usage of magic entirely for the constant wars and damage that has emerged from it. The story matures in this book, as for the first time in the Maleurous questline, the player is actually presented with choices that aren't just either you continue playing the game or you died lol. And additionally, for the first time within it, these choices lead to actual deviations within the quest dialogue and provide alternate cutscenes and boss fights. Critique aside, you can't shame a 2-man dev team for being this ambitious. I applaud the effort, and I feel like more recognition could be given to the team on that front. But in the Maleurous questline, your character takes a break from fighting that organization wanting to end magic called the Rose, as the Avatars, which are kind of like the guardians of the world as is, warn your hero that new incredibly dangerous threats have emerged, unsurprisingly being the titular Maleurous, and additionally they bring along a new character, Uwanta, who seemingly serves as the hero's narrative parallel in another part of the world. You can tell because they call them avatars and she calls them makers, and you've been fighting these dark evil people and she instead fights light-based evil people. But that's pretty much all the background you need. In order to be as objective as we can in our analysis here, I think it's worth going over their actions and proceeding change of heart to determine if they'd still be suitable guardians as they're presenting themselves to currently be. Now, I know some will say, oh, the past doesn't count, and oh, they changed, as I've seen that enough times in the DragonFable community forums, but you can't gauge their efficacy without actually looking into their characters. And yes, that does include Book 1. The avatars are mentioned here and there in Book 1, but their first real appearance is in the final showdown, which is a quest within the Notha arc. Essentially, in this quest line, Notha is growing impatient because she wants to use her dragon magic, but Warlick won't teach her how to use it yet. Notha fights her mentor, Warlick fakes his death, and Notha takes his magic orb. She challenges the avatars for being mean to her, which is a little weird because if I'm not wrong, she's never mentioned them before this quest. But still, she takes them on a 1v8. It's a scripted loss. She either overloads on the magic or is defeated after a long fight, and she realizes that she can't win. Using Warlick's magical orb, she seemingly brings him back from the dead. He forgives her and reveals that it was all for the sake of teaching her a lesson. Warlick apologizes to the avatars, and they're understandably a little upset. Obviously, they want to deal with Notha, but Warlick isn't letting them. So, they threaten to flood and drown the rest of the cities in the world, ending civilization over a prideful teenager. Wait, what? Yeah, Warlick fends them off, but I want to put that into perspective. If Warlick hadn't handed Notha over in that situation and was defeated there, the Guardians of the World would have destroyed the land they were protecting all along because a teenager challenged them, who also lost. A common retort is, oh, well, it doesn't count, they're different characters, it's book 1. Well, in a character analysis, we have to go over all of their major appearances, and barring the Maleurous saga, this is their only other major appearance. I'm not cherry picking. It's not a great start to their track record, but you know what? Let's see. There may be some good they do later on, so for now though, I'll just make a list and we'll just categorize this based on that. So far, they almost destroyed the world they were meant to protect after a teenager challenged them, who also lost. Now, let's move on to the Maleurous questline. Their next appearance is in Firmament, where we meet Uanta for the first time. Uanta is incredibly dogmatic, and is your typical traditional devout character who's horrified anytime your character disrespects the avatars. The avatars themselves here have no idea how many Maleurous there are, or who they're allied with. It's a whole back and forth, but they follow the ideals and philosophies of the types of what the mysterious stranger wants, was the general consensus given by the avatars, the mysterious stranger being the big bad of book 1. Now I want you to remember this because I'll be coming back to it later. The avatars send Uanta and your character to fight the first Maleurous. Your character asks why, and they say it's because you are good and it is bad. Your character then asks why they can't just do it themselves, and Uanta apologizes to one of them again, using the term makers, which causes an interesting interaction. One of the avatars, Chaos, and I know for a fact I'm butchering the pronunciations of these names, but let me slide here, is about to say, we're not your makers, which is cut off by another avatar, Saga, saying they've been watching over the world far longer than they sleep. They, in this instance, referring to the actual creators of the DragonFable world, Equilibria. She then goes on a power-tripping rant saying that because of this, they are the real gods of this world before she's cut off by another avatar, Voidstar, presumably for insubordination towards the Equilibria. It's clear that in this instance, Celeritas is overstepping her boundaries, which already sets a dangerous precedent considering, as we've already established, they were willing to destroy civilization over a teenager. This by itself is concerning, but you know what, perhaps it's not an immense risk. But I think in tandem with this next quest and a few more that I'll be going over, it highlights the actual problem. Let's take a look at Exomni's Fabula, in which the Dreamfarer of the Maleurous, Remthalas, visits the hero in his or her dreams. A long story short, Remthalas makes the hero fight Uanta. The hero wins, and Remthalas decides that he's interested in them. The avatars summon the hero right after they wake up, and they tell them that, well, they spoke with Remthalas, and the avatars immediately take issue with this. The hero has questions as Sinocents, the first Maleurous, let themselves be killed and clearly wasn't all mentally there. Remthalas, whilst weird, seems to be in the same kind of situation. But Vyam, the fire avatar, is about to say it's because they're bringers of change, before being cut off by Celeritas again, who says that they're bringers of war and destruction, which is why that can't be tolerated. Vyam's dialogue is indicative that the avatars are aware that they're agents of change, which will presumably bring about destruction, as Celeritas mentions, but considering that prior dialogue, it's clear that there's a bias towards the change being potentially threatening towards their rule, motivating them to be less truthful about the nature of the Maleurous to the hero and Uanta. So to put this into context, the avatars fear a group which are, in their own words, bringers of change, and at least one of them wants to cement themselves as gods of the new world, which is very likely to make sure that change, especially in their rule, doesn't happen. And soon I'll be explaining how the game presents objective evidence as to why this is not a good idea. Even if we do take Celeritas' word for it that the Maleurous are bringers of war and destruction, the next quest further proves that their whole approach to ruling the world was faulty to begin with. So let's take a look at reactivation. By this point, we've already met Lock and Key, considered Maleurous, but they're simply sentient data storage containers from a civilization called the Exalted, which predates the current one. I think regardless of your stance on the saga, most people generally agree that they're quite objective in their analyses. They're presented as such in the narrative after all. Even Notha trusts them, and the avatars defer to her judgment here. Lock and Key outright state that the actions of the avatars create more problems, more variables that disrupt the natural push and pull of fate because they fear the unknown and losing control, with their responsibilities having ended when certain prophecies began, and yet the avatars still cling to them. Bear in mind, the avatars literally admit this themselves in a later quest, Iconoclasm. But we'll get to this later. It's just like I said prior, and what we inferred in the other quests. The avatars overstep their boundaries and are now creating more disruptions by being attached to a role that they have no business occupying. Even the worst avatar, Celeritas, acknowledges that Lock and Key know much of the avatar's histories, which they thought nobody knew of. I think as it stands, with the list being the avatars overstepping their boundaries and ruining the natural order of fate, causing more problems, and yet doubling down on their newly developed god complexes in the progress, and almost destroying civilization in the process over an angsty teen who challenged them and lost, I think we've already got a decent argument as to why they can't be entrusted with this duty, but we can go even further, so let's take a look at Revelation. So this quest is Notha's first reveal, and we get a glimpse of her motivations. And before it's asked, she comes from the Ace Attorney naming conventions of Notha Liar, probably a pun on another liar, but ironically, everything she says in this quest is fairly reasonable. Not knowing that the heroes have already been told the truth by Lock and Key, she tells them without reserve that the Avatar's over-involvement in the world is actively, unintentionally sabotaging it. Additionally, she brings up quite an important point. Whilst Uanta says that the Avatars are learning and changing, Notha states the obvious. A hard, ingrained mentality over centuries can't change in a couple of weeks, months, or even years. To quote her directly, entities as old as them don't just change. Even if we were to assume that the avatars were being affected, like Celeritas suggests, what about the situation with Notha when that wasn't even a factor? Who's to say that after 200 years, they might not just grow tired of Lock and Key and become heavy-handed once again? And in that situation, who would be around to stop them? The hero wouldn't be there, and neither would Uanta. The avatars would have the best intents, but continue to ruin the natural cycle of order, just as Lock and Key suggested prior. Now, I'm not suggesting that the avatars here should be killed, as many are suggesting, but they're clearly unviable protectors based on everything we've seen, and glossing over it is foolhardy at best. Consider this. Book 3 focuses on the individual level. We've seen directly through situations like Guardian Kane and through the Sulan-Eska saga how conflicts within the DragonFable's story affects the individual people of the world. Now, is it rational to really trust the fate of everyone to a group with a proven pretty bad track record? And I know I'm going to get hit with the "it's just book 1 though," but if we have to ignore, effectively, entire chunks of canon, literally their first major appearance to try to absolve them, that's just a bit silly. This is the equivalent of ignoring everything Sepultura did in book 1 because it was written differently. I know this will be a bit tangential, but I think it's slightly ironic that so many people are vehemently against the Rose and Jarnia for clamping down on the use of magic, and yet they're willing to support another group with a worse track record, who directly threaten to, again, destroy the world and control fate itself, who we've seen is just making things even worse in the process. Jarnia is of course incredibly misguided, but at least she never got to that point. And no, the illusion of her perfect world covered in ice doesn't really count. The same people say that the rose is inflexible and doesn't listen to alternatives when the avatars have been doing the same thing for much longer. I digress. She continues to state that their perfect balance would leave them nothing more than obedient worshippers, which is also objectively true. The avatars quite literally expected the hero, as we discussed in Firmament, to kill Senescence with no debriefing whatsoever, just telling him or her that Senescence is bad and the hero is good and it's an honor to be their champion, so they shouldn't be questioned. Even when they eventually return to the avatars at the end of Reclamation, when the hero asks why they insist on keeping control, they simply reiterate that it's their duty, which we've now proven they're failing, and it's because they're keeping law in balance lest it fall to ruin and destruction. You know, the place they threaten to quite literally ruin and destroy. And this was without the argument of the avatars being affected by the Maleurous aura applying. Just think about that. The Avatar's argument as to why they should keep power is the exact reason they shouldn't have it in the first place. At the end of this quest, Uanta says she's lying and Notha's wrong, but about what? A lot of people point to Maleurous in Reclamation as evidence that Notha is deceptive, but all she does, as revealed in the next quest and a later one, is that she gave him a new body and reminded him that he was imprisoned by the avatars. And before you say this is because Maleurous is having an emotionally charged moment, even he echoes this sentiment in that later quest, which is Remembrance. I think it's a fair point to say that Notha used Maleurous here, as even she says that she can't pin all of her actions on the avatars later on, but it doesn't change anything I've mentioned prior. Of course though, with all this talk about Notha, we need to discuss her character, so let's talk about her backstory drop, which was controversial, in Iconoclasm. Looked after and financially well off as a child, Notha's biggest problems were her family buying her friends and Notha having no real sense of connection. I think it's fair to say that at first she doesn't seem that justified. She prays to the avatars, dedicating her life to figuring out what her purpose from them was, and unsurprisingly nothing happens. She discovers the secrets of past civilizations the avatars hid from society to make sure they couldn't be challenged, and that her faith was built on a lie, something which the avatars confirm in that same quest, with the worst avatar, Celeritas once again, describing it as well maintained by the people and it being an effective way of, I'm paraphrasing here as she's cut off, but an effective way of maintaining order. And then, as we know, she was imprisoned in Baron Balrod's mask for decades afterward. This is where the avatars actually admit themselves they were ruining the world. Sure, they recognize their mistake, but even if they were being affected by the balancing force of doom, then what's stopping a similar influence, say 500 or 1000 years down the line, driving them to do exactly the same thing? Uanta trusts the avatars completely, and is understandable, given, as she says in Revelation, that the hero has had a much more inconsistent experience with them. But we should be applying a more critical lens here, because we're the ones in this quest line not operating on blind faith, whereas Uanta is. This brings us to our final quest, Revolution. Here, the debate, the contention, it reaches a climax, and I think Notha, throughout the whole of the Maleurous quest line, is certainly antagonistic compared to Uanta, who's written more likable, but we should be viewing things objectively here. This is where I'd actually like to present a new point though. I think siding with Notha is more thematically cohesive with the entirety of Book 3. This book, unlike the other two, has an undeniable focal motif on choice and nuanced conflict, whether it be through the hero being made aware of the nuances of the Floorkin, having to work with Sepulture to stop the Rose, or working with the Rose in some instances, like with Magus Hansa, for the greater good. Across all of these narrative points, the hero has demonstrated flexibility in being willing to work with those he doesn't necessarily agree with or even like, if it means securing a better outcome and a safer future. But let's round this off with a final look into Notha in Remembrance. Here, it's confirmed, like I said prior, she offered Maleurous a chance at life, And Maleurous notes that the avatars would have imprisoned him or forced him into their subservience based on their past behaviors. If you selected the Notha route in Revolution, she actually has, I think, some pretty good dialogue, discussing that sure, chaos isn't ideal, but if a new oppressor arose, just like the avatars, then they'd fight back, just like they did with the avatars. Both Notha and the hero become friends, and Notha admits that while she did put a lot of blame on the avatars, her actions were truly her own. She didn't rise up solely because of the avatars, and she didn't do all of her research because of the avatars. She saw an opportunity to finally gain the greatest semblance of control in her life and understanding, and she took it because she never had that growing up. I think that's a good round off to the beginning of her new direction in book 4, yet it's undeniable. Her actions are her own, but her actions are justified. Just to round off the list one last time, the avatars almost committed genocide because a teenager challenged them and lost. They developed god complexes above equilibria. They actively sabotaged the natural order, making things worse as confirmed by Lock and Key, and later themselves, they actively deceived civilizations and manipulated them through faith, and their core justification is self-defeating. They say they're in power to prevent the world's ruin and destruction, but when they were in power unchallenged, what did they do? Sure, they might have maintained elemental balance, but they threatened to, again, destroy civilization. That said though, I think it's time we tackle some common retorts. So let's start with the first one. The avatars have changed and they're learning. Now, I'd actually like to bring up something new to this point. So the neutral arbiters, as we've discussed, Lock and Key, outright say that if the avatars were to return to, I think it's Leshiak, that's how it's pronounced, the influence of destiny would make them return, and even more heavy-handed than before. Think about that. Their supposed growth, their character development, was temporary magical influence and debatably not even real change in their personalities. Even the neutral parties confirm they would be worse than before if they went to a specific place. Even if we were to disregard this pointer, these are beings that have again existed for centuries, and behavior ingrains after such a long period of time. Everyone lapses. They've lapsed as shown from the beginning of this quest line, but if they have a bad lapse in say 300 years when they're ruling the world, who's going to stop them? Because it's not going to be the hero and it's not going to be Uanta. But book 1 doesn't count, it's early writing. This is a character analysis on all fronts, and again, their only other major appearance was in the final showdown. We can't ignore that first appearance. That is the best and only example we have of them directly, imposing their rule on the people. Actually, we should have been neutral. Well, that wasn't an option, and we were given 2 dialogue boxes. I just think that the Notha box is less of a problem. But the avatars were trying their best. Well, the Rose was trying their best. That didn't absolve them, and it certainly shouldn't absolve threats of genocide in the case of the avatars. Okay, but what about a prophecy? What if they can help out? Lock and Key, as mentioned before, confirmed that the avatars' role in the prophecies has ended and that they're clinging to obsolescence. All in all, the avatars' core justification for their power is preventing destruction, but they are the only ones in this entire saga, not Mr. Nameless, not Notha, not even Innocence, who actually threaten to destroy civilization. In Notha's own words, she doesn't even intend to drag law into doom. To do so is to decay, erode, and self-destruct. Whereas Notha finishes off Innocent, who was already dying and suffering, and Notha manipulates Maleurous, who confirms himself that the avatars would have hunted him anyway, and that Notha wants to reveal the truth of false religions, the avatars instead threaten innocent civilians with the death for the crime of existing in a world with someone they don't like in Notha, widely deceiving entire cultures through false religions, imprisoning those who find out the truth, and then fleeing their responsibilities in a small interdimensional bubble where no one can confront them. Even if you say they're both wrong, how is threatening to destroy all of civilization less wrong than wanting to change a political system? Many people in this community engage in this discussion. In my opinion, this is going to be a bit controversial, but this video already is, so I'm no stranger to it. But there's a bit of tone policing going on, because whereas Uanta is respectful, appears wise and follows tradition, Notha seems arrogant, impatient and rude. But when you actually look into things, the quote-unquote civil side here in Uanta is literally threatening genocide. The avatars have done that. And I like how the writers have handled this for this reason. They're making Notha deliberately abrasive whilst genuinely giving her stronger arguments. Like they're testing us whether we choose based on logic or aesthetics. And as it stands, in some spots right now, it almost looks like the aesthetics are winning. I think that's all the common talking points addressed, but that actually wraps it up. It took me all day to write the script alone, and God knows how long the editing will take, but this was fun, and I think Maleurous, whilst controversial and certainly with narrative stumbling blocks, is one of the best arcs DragonFable has ever done. And this contention, all these ongoing debates is evidence of that. If the ending tied up, I think it would easily be the best saga in the entire history of the series, in my opinion. But yeah, no, this was a very cool video to make, and if you want to see more like these on certain topics, let me know in the comments. As far as I know, there's no DragonFable YouTuber for story discussions, and it would be cool to be that guy, especially moving into book 4, but that's enough waffling from me. If you like this, give it a like, maybe subscribe, and yeah, no, I appreciate you checking this out, and if you made it to this point, I appreciate you hearing me out. Peace, see you later.